Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 48 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Alexander Syrsky. During the previous day he made a very interesting statement. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, General Syrsky, announced that the commander of the assault forces, Colonel Valentin Manko, will be relieved of his position, so he will be dismissed. And this is everything that you need to know about the Ukraine's counter-offensive operation in the Zaporozhye direction. First, the Ukrainians conducted this counter-offensive operation using, of course, a lot of forces, a lot of assault forces, and later we received the report that the commander of these forces would be dismissed. So this is exactly the results of this counter-offensive operation. The Ukrainians during this counter-attack used lots of forces, especially around the settlement of Ternavate, and we have this video published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see how the Russians were attacking vehicles of the armed forces of Ukraine that were moving in the direction of the settlement of Ternavate. As you can see, lots of explosions, lots of infantry fighting carriers, lots of armored vehicles, and so on. The Russians were attacking them with drones, with Lancet drones, with artillery systems, and so on. The sources are saying that some of these vehicles managed to break through Russia's defense, but most of them were destroyed. So there are several geolocations. One of the attacks took place right exactly at this point around the settlement of Pridorozhye, and we believe that this small village located to the east of the village of Ryazvanka was recaptured by the armed forces of Ukraine, but there were just something like sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Their main purpose was to be a first line of defense if Ukraine decide to counterattack, and this is exactly what happened. Basically, the Ukrainians managed to break through this settlement without any resistance from the Russian side, but the time the Russians managed to win was enough to organize defense around the settlement of Ternavate. Furthermore, we have a geolocation along the central street, along its eastern parts, how the Russians were attacking vehicles of the armed forces of Ukraine at this point. And based on this video, we see that Ukrainians were tasked to cut the city of Ternavate from supply and support. As you can see, as you might know, lots of mappers adjusted the map as if the entire village was recaptured by the armed forces of Ukraine, but this is not the correct situation. The Ukrainians were trying to cut the main supply lines in the southern and the southeastern parts, so the Ukrainians were tasked to establish complete control over this territory and to block supply and support that may come, that may be sent by the Russians. As of now, we know for sure that one of the supply lines was completely cut by the armed forces of Ukraine along the central street at this point. As of the central part of the city, there are still lots of Russian forces and there are still very heavy clashes. The Russians are trying to hold their positions, the Ukrainians are trying to clean the settlements, but it seems that the mission failed. Anyway, we need additional days to understand what exactly is happening in this area. Most likely we'll get additional updates. The Russians are regrouping. The sources are saying that the Russians managed to introduce operational reserves in this area, so the clashes are ongoing. Let's wait and see what is going to be next. Another important thing is that the Russians during the previous 24 hours finished the battle for the settlement of Zaliznychne. This morning, pro-Russian sources published a video of clashes for this settlement, and as a result of clashes, according to pro-Russian sources, the village was captured completely, and we have two geolocations where Russians raised their flag. The first of them took place in the western part of the settlement and the second one in the southern part. So based on this video, we have colored the map. So these are the changes on the ground during the previous 48 hours. So this is how the map was adjusted. Another important thing, we need to understand that when talking about the armed forces of Ukraine and Syrsky, he is tasked not to, let's say, counter-attack in this area and to recapture the territories almost until the village of Velika Novosovka or even further towards the settlement of Kurakhova. This is not the task of the armed forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainians are tasked to improve their positions before the beginning of a major battle for the city of Zaporozhye. Simply saying, the Ukrainians are tasked to establish complete control over everything along this yellow line. So recapture everything along the river of Gaichur, along the railways, and to get or to approach the city of Guliapole. So this is the task, this is the primary target of Ukrainians, because they understand that within the next 2 months, the Russians will finish regrouping and they will continue, or they will start the major offensive operations towards the city of Zaporozhye. Today, several pro-Ukrainian sources stated that the Russians began preparation of a very powerful group of forces. They started this preparation in during the summer of 2025, so more than 6-7 months ago, and within the next 2-3 months it will be up to 10 months or 10 months of huge preparation of these forces. And the Russians are tasked for the 2026 military campaign either to establish complete control over everything from the river of Gaichul to the river of Dnipro, including the city of Zaporozhye, or just to take under complete control these fields, to approach the city of Zaporozhye and to block the city of Zaporozhye from the north, from the east, and from the south. This is going to be the blockade. This situation will force the population of Ukraine to abandon their homes, because from these positions they will have no chances to supply and support and to stay there. And most likely the Ukrainian force would do the same, because the river of Dnipro will not allow the armed forces of Ukraine and the military authorities to provide proper supply for the city itself. So this is the task, and the counter-offensive of Ukraine is tasked to stabilize the situation and to win some time. To win some time, and not just to win some time, but to make everything they can with the purpose to allow the Russians before the winter of 2026, the late winter, to get probably just this line. So this is the task of Ukrainians, because they understand if they are able to stop the Russians during this upcoming year on this red line, they will be able to save the city of Zaporozhye for at least the beginning of spring or the beginning of summer of 2027. And we know that currently the Ukrainians are not fighting for borders, they're not fighting for guarantees, they're fighting for time. They believe, the Ukrainian side believes that in time everything may change. As for the western Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were also recorded. This is the situation by the end of the 9th of February. This is the beginning of 10th of February. The Russians, according to information we have, improved their positions significantly in the southern part of the settlement of Nova Andriivka. The Russians are intensifying their offensive operation. They are tasked to establish control over the city of Orekhov as soon as possible. And with the updates about the city of Zaliznychne, most likely the battle for the city of Orekhov is going to start within the next 2 months. So somewhere at the beginning or in the middle of April, the Russians will try to take the settlement of Orekhov under complete control. Furthermore, the Russians improve their positions to the west of the city of Orekhov, so the Russians are approaching this settlement also using these roads of attacks. And another important update, according to different pro-Russian sources, the Russians are trying to improve their positions around Mala Katerinovka, and maybe the Russians will try to answer this settlement as well. So this is a very interesting situation, because basically the settlement of Mala Katerinovka is the beginning of the great Zaporozhye agglomeration from the south. So entering the Mala Katerinovka settlement means the beginning for the city of Zaporozhye, small battle for the city of Zaporozhye itself. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but both the Russians and the Ukrainians understand very clearly what is going to happen here and what both the Russians and the Ukrainians are doing for these purposes. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction. The map hasn't been adjusted, as you can see. There are still very heavy clashes. Very difficult to understand what is happening. The only thing we have is lots of updates from the most southern part of the settlements, where we can see Ukrainians trying to hide in buildings and how the Russians were attacking them with FPV drones. So it seems that the Russians are trying to break through Ukraine's defense from between the village of Berestov in the southern part of the city of Konstantinovka. We have lots of icons in this area. So the Russians are trying to advance along these tree lines to enter the settlement and to, let's say, open the southern front of the city of Konstantinovka. So we expect that maybe in coming days the map would be adjusted right exactly in this area. But as of now, the Ukrainians control more than 80% of the settlement and are still holding their lines. But when talking about the Slaviansk direction, the situation here a bit different. For example, during the previous 48 hours, the map had been adjusted significantly. So this is the situation by the end of the 8th of February of 2026, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 10th of February of 2026. As you can see, according to these updates, the Russians have almost finished the battle for the defense, for the first defense layer of the armored forces of Ukraine in the direction of the city of Slaviansk, and the Russians improved their position significantly towards the second defense layer, and it seems that the second defense layer is also about to collapse. We had these reports and these updates published and adjusted and provided by pro-Ukrainian sources. According to them, huge gray zone was expanded to the south of the settlement of Fedorovka, which means that most likely all these tree lines, forests and fields are about to be taken and captured by the Russians, and the battle for the settlement of Fedorovka Druga will begin. Another important area is the city of Liman. We see that the battle of the city is entering its decisive phase. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see, the map has been adjusted significantly. This is the end of the 9th, and this is the beginning of 10th of February. The map has been adjusted based on the video published by pro-Ukrainian sources, where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians in the eastern part or through the eastern part of the settlement of Liman. Based on this video, we have adjusted the entire eastern flank of the city, which means that the Russians are infiltrating and are continuing infiltrating inside of the city. So this is the decisive phase of the battle has begun. Let's wait and see what is going to be next. The Ukrainians at the same time continue sending more and more sources and forces with the purpose to stabilize the situation, but this is the biggest problem. The Russians control the river of Seversky Donetsk, and when they see anything, they just attack this immediately. So in a very interesting situation, I will share with you my opinion. So the city of Liman is the same situation as the city of Zaporozhye when the Russians approach the city. So the river, and this river of Dnipro is much bigger than the river of Seversky Donetsk, which means that Ukrainians have possibilities to use boats, for example, to cross the river, but when talking about Dnipro River, they will not be able to have these possibilities. The river of Dnipro is much bigger, and there are many places where the Ukrainians would have to cross the river, and if Russians establish control with drones, no chances for supply and support, maybe using some underground ways, but I'm not sure with the Ukrainians are able to do something like this. Now let's move further. As for the Kupiansk direction, northern Kupiansk direction, during the previous hours, during the previous days, we received lots of videos. As you can see, the map has been adjusted, but we received lots of videos that confirm the current line of combat contact. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians through the entire northern Kupiansk direction, and lots of episodes, lots of geolocations, and some of them were added to the map. So all these attacks means that the map that you can see right now in front of your screens is something that more or less probably corresponds with the reality. As for the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours, the most important updates came from the southeastern direction of the city of Sumy. So we have changes on the ground. This is the situation by the end of the 8th of February. This is the beginning of the 2nd of February. The Russians, according to information we have, improved their positions in the village of Pokrovka. And we have videos where we can see how the Ukrainians of the 14th Military Corps were attacking Russian soldiers that were moving in this area. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map. We see that the Russians are keeping on advancing in the Sumy direction, and most likely in coming days we will receive additional updates. The same thing is about the most northern part of the Sumy region. Here we can see additional changes on the ground. This is the end of the 7th of February. During the 8th of February, the Russians reported that the settlement of Sidorovka was captured by Russians, and by the beginning of the 10th of February, we have additional changes on the ground along the border, which means that, as we discussed during the previous video, the Russians continue advancing towards the village of Chervona Zorya and then towards the village of Babylivka. So these two villages are the next task for the armored forces of Russia. In other important updates, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked the city of Kiev with a significant number of missiles. The sources are saying that between the 8th and 9th of February of 2026, the Russians armed forces launched a series of Iskander-M ballistic missile strikes against the Vasilkov airfield located 30 kilometers from the city of Kiev. Very difficult to understand what exactly the Russians were attacking, but once again they used lots of missiles for these purposes. Maybe the Ukrainians received some cargo or something like this. As of the end of the beginning of the 10th of February, we don't know for sure what exactly was attacked, but most likely something important. Another important thing is that the European Union is developing an unprecedented accelerated partial European Union membership for Ukraine by 2027. Brussels is proposing to do this even before all necessary reforms are completed. European Union and Ukrainian diplomats and officials told Politico. The acceleration is necessary to secure a peace deal for Ukraine. Kiev is insisting on joining the European Union in 2027, so that this date is included in the peace deal with the Kremlin. The idea envisions Ukraine receiving a seat at the European Union table and gradual access to rights and obligations while continuing reforms as a part of the process. So everybody understands that most likely Russia will never accept this, but this will also lead to the situation if Ukraine joins European Union before the end of the conflict. This will mean that European Union will join the war with the Russian Federation from some point of view. The Russians are saying that the Kremlin is pressing Trump to move faster on Ukraine as talks show no breakthrough. Moscow is increasingly urging Washington to force Zelensky to accept the so-called Anchorage terms, including a withdrawal from parts of Donetsk region. Foreign Minister Lavrov and Putin spokesman Peskov made this explicit today. A breakthrough is only possible if the understandings reached in the Anchorage and respected. Lavrov argued that Russia accepted a U.S. proposal in Anchorage and accused Washington of backtracking and refusing to follow through while escalating pressure through new sanctions and actions against Russia energy shipment. Lavrov emphasized that Russia accepted the U.S. proposal in Ukraine in Anchorage, and if we approach it like a man, the problem should be resolved. Also, he stated that the spirit of Anchorage has soared. Lavrov, the U.S. is no longer ready to accept its proposals on Ukraine made in Anchorage. So all these things, all these statements are telling us just about one thing, that most likely all these talks, all these things that we saw during winter were just something to distract our attention. And the most important thing that was happening during the same period of time is that both the Russians and the Ukrainians were regrouping and accumulating forces. And today lots of sources from Ukraine and the Western countries are saying that the Russians managed to concentrate huge forces to continue offensive operation in the Zaporozhye direction and in the Donetsk regions. So these two battles are going to happen, and these two battles are going to last during the spring and summer of 2026, and only by the end of the spring, summer and early autumn campaigns we will see the results, and we will understand whether the parties are ready for negotiations and to conduct a peaceful settlement of the conflict. Only then, so which means that the next 6-7 months we will see just clashes. Furthermore, we received additional details about an assassination attempt that took place several days ago. The detainees in the case of the attempt on General Alexeyev, Lyubomir Kobra and Viktor Vasin have admitted their guilt, the FSB reported. The perpetrator of the attempt on General Alexeyev was recruited by the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, in August 2025. He underwent firearms training at a military base in Kiev, according to the Federal Security Service. The order to attempt to assassinate General Alexeyev came from the SBU. So this is probably the final signal to the Russian Federation that nobody is going to follow anything related to Anchorage, and most likely this is the final thing that forced the Russians thinking that the special military operation, the conflict in Ukraine, will continue. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.